Hello fellow sim racers and welcome to another episode of Talking Sims. Today I'm joined by Josh Martin from the Events House, who's both an esports competitor and someone who's deeply involved in the commercial side of running sim racing live events and esports. We're going to be talking about how those sort of things impact sim racing as a whole and taking a little bit of a look behind the scenes at what goes into producing an event or a live setup like this in sim racing. First of all, Josh, thank you for having me here today and for joining me on the show. I guess we should probably start off by getting you to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in sim racing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chris. So yeah, my name's Josh. I'm an esports producer and a sim racer. So my background in this is I grew up playing video games, the F1 games that we're all familiar with, got a bit more interested in the professional side of stuff. And very quickly realized that whilst I couldn't make a competitive career of it as such, there is room in the commercial side of things. And that's kind of what brings us here today.
That's very cool. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about your background in sim racing, just expand on that a little bit if you can.
Yeah, sure. So like I say, I started with the F1 games, the more arcadey games, if you will, more casual games, I should say.
We've already got into the arcade simcade thing.
Offended
2
a lot
minutes
of people.
into the show.
Yeah, apologies. So some of the more casual games, shall we say, and then fell in love with Assetto Corsa actually. So I'm sure you'll remember when it first came out, it was very limited with its content. And as that kind of grew, my interest in sim racing grew. Purely because, like a lot of people, I couldn't afford real racing, but I could feel that need and that urge online. So it was a lot of competitive stuff, league races with friends, with people I didn't know, and then watching people like in F1 esports, the Dirt World Championships, and trying to emulate that ability. So my whole background has been almost a fascination with how people are so quick and how to reach that level.
So what then drew you to the commercial side of things then?
Yeah, so I think if we look particularly at how the market's going today, you've got stuff like the SMSR, the SRO GT Sports Series. There's so much that goes on in the background that people maybe don't realize unless they're competing themselves or they're like yourself commentating. And I'm sure, as you know, the amount of staff is huge. So
the legs are moving very quickly underwater while
exactly,
the swan is looking rather serene. Well, not always looking that serene on the surface, but it tries.
It tries its best, exactly. So I found that actually, if you have a sim racer who's behind the scenes helping out, whether it's simple stuff like adjusting the rigs for the drivers, or even help develop the series as they move forward, it can make a huge difference in how not only the public receive it, but how the drivers are comfortable. And for people like yourself, being able to be in an environment that makes sense. There's so much discipline fragmentation between what should be a sim racing broadcast and what it is currently, as I'm sure you'd agree.
Yeah. Very much so. I'm going to be very professional and look at my phone and work out what question 2 is going to be. So we have sort of already started to touch on the whole business side of live events and esports. I think I've certainly noticed, and I'm sure my viewers have noticed, that all of a sudden sim racing has become quite big business. There are live events popping up everywhere. We've got sim centers like this, which I'm going to let you introduce in a second because this place is really cool. And so first of all, why now? Do you think sim racing's maybe just reached a level of maturity that it's able to be unleashed on the public in that way?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, to be honest, I've joined sim racing about 5 or 6 years ago, so I consider myself quite young in the community, maybe not as old as people like yourself. But I think we're now really seeing a sort of commercialization and mass market approach now for sim racing competitions. I guess F1 esports is the best example of that. You know, it's something that's now been shown on the F1 channels, that kind of stuff. And I think when you have that natural growth and people wanting to basically turn it into a business, you're going to see the growth of competitions and centers in line with that for sure.
Yeah, so well, why don't you introduce this place?
Yeah, so we're actually here at the Mercedes-Benz World venue, which is one of the installations that the Events House have done here. And in its simplest form, it's an enhanced driving experience. So whilst you're at Mercedes-Benz World, you can go on driving experiences, but you can also then jump in the simulator. And as you've seen, Chris, they're sims that aren't too far from what people will have at home.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
But then we do have also a motion simulator in the background. So there's options for people to try stuff that's maybe new to them, but also is stuff that they're already recognized with.
Yeah, I think what's impressed me, it's not too busy at the moment now, but what we've been setting up this morning, there have been dozens and dozens of people, members of the public, who've clearly, if you watch them, never been on a racing sim in their life, who have come in, they've come down to Mercedes-Benz World, presumably to take part in a driving experience or just to have a look around at all the awesome cars here. And they've come in, they've paid a small amount of money and jumped on a simulator. They're setting lap times. It's competitive. I think I'd still be at the top of the leaderboard if we'd written ourselves on there, but not with a very impressive time, I must add. But I'm totally blown away by just how much public involvement there is in this.
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly for the viewers of your channel and your community, they're people who are very technically minded and they want to learn about the intricacies of sim racing. So seeing it not only at home with their Heisenfeld rig or whatever the case may be, you know, top end, being able to kind of take a step back almost and look at its core level, you know, we could see people coming in today, and it's a bit maybe out there, but you could see people coming in, kids, trying out a simulator for the first time and kind of falling in love with the sensation of driving.
It's funny you mention that, because in the episode I recorded with Paul on Tuesday night, I think we recorded it, went out. Actually, it went out yesterday, didn't it? Mind you, I don't know when this is going out, so all of those timings are highly important. Anyway, with the episode with Paul, we were touching on one of the great misses we thought of Sim Racing Expo this year, was that it was all super high-end kit. And if someone is just walking around, you know, they've come out for the day, they've gone to the Nürburgring, because there's so much to do there. I mean, the shops there for, you know, it's not, it's a place people will go to rather than just turn up because it's Sim Racing Expo. And you're never going to turn up there with your kid and be like, yeah, we really want to get into sim racing. Yeah. When all you can see is 30 or 40,000 euro full motion rigs. This place has got, and I'll get some B-roll cut in here, hopefully, if I've edited this well. And you can let me know in the comments if I hadn't. They've even got like little rigs set up for kids, like shortened, like 80-20 rigs designed for like little ones, and that's amazing to see. It's not something I've seen anywhere else, actually, Josh.
Yeah, it's something that Credit Where It's Due, the events house, we've been working really hard on, because, like I say, we've got, you know, sim racers and designers and all these kind of people who understand the market. It's about, okay, for a commercial venue like this, generating the most footfall and sales and stuff, but also creating the best experience. So if you've got, you know, an older brother who sim races and you're a young kid, you can both go on sims and maybe not race together, but be in the same environment, which I guess in a nice way is kind of what sim racing, it's what it means to me. You know, it's about having fun with friends. Sure, there's a competitive aspect. I don't know how you feel.
No, definitely. There's still, I think one of the things I said in my review of Grid earlier in the week is it's great to have another game I can put on the PC in my living room and play with my mates on the couch. I did that with Gran Turismo. I did that with the Project Gotham games and the Forza games. Because I mean, that's where I've come from. Sure, I love spending 4 hours desperately trying to get competitive enough that I can get involved in one of our community races and not look like an idiot. But sometimes it's fun just to, as you say, just jump on with some mates and turn some laps.
Well, that's it. And I think in terms of looking at kind of the way that I've gone in the sim racing market is, I know that I'll not be as quick as the guys like Brendan Lee and that kind of stuff, but that's okay because I'm competitive in the community that I'm around and I can still help grow the market in some way. And I guess what a lot of people maybe don't realize unless you go to live events is it's people like the commentators, the film crew that are also helping to grow the esports scene. And I think we should be, you know, working together to help grow it.
Well, we're trying.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, you and I are certainly. Shall we move on?
Yeah.
So I think we've actually covered, the next part of that question was what impact does putting on these kind of live events and these event centers have on sim racing? And I guess you've sort of touched on that, but presumably just this is all positive. It's just another point of entry to a hobby that does have some pretty narrow points of entry. Yeah,
definitely. I think it'd be really interesting to hear in the comments kind of what people's impressions are of live events that haven't been to them. You and I are very lucky. We've traveled the world now, basically trackside at so many great events put on by great people. And it is, for the most part, great. You know, the broadcast production quality, the commentators aren't bad, the racing's good.
They do their best.
And okay, you have technical mishaps like we had it. I'm just thinking off that, like Paul Ricard, for example, not great. But it's, if we can help grow that side of the broadcast and help benefit esports as a whole, then I don't see there being any issues.
No, absolutely. I've said absolutely. That's again, apologies for referring back to the episode with Paul, which some of you may have not have watched. There's been a bit of an issue this year in the SRO series that where Paul and I, when we're handing stuff off to each other while commentating, there's a preponderance to say absolutely. And now we know it's there.
So you're conscious of this, yeah?
It's bad. It's really bad. I don't think I've ever said absolutely in my life prior to Monza.
I think what you'll really be upset about is the fact we have a sofa as well.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to send Paul a photo of this. We can take a selfie and send it to him. Can you take us through what actually goes into putting on a live event, either esports or corporate? I mean, not so much an installation type thing, but an actual live esports event, maybe.
Yeah, so a really good example would be the 2019 PlaySeat SMSR series, which we at the Events House were behind the scenes running. And we actually had the finals here at Mercedes-Benz World.
Nice.
So what's really cool is it all starts way far in advance, and I'm sure you'll have been involved in these kind of meetings, but it's the basic stuff like the rules and regulations, making sure you've got the right assists set, the weather settings, the time of day. That all happens at the start. And as a sim racer, I was quite naive to this. I didn't think about it when I entered a competition. I would usually just complain that, oh, it's Monza again with a Porsche or whatever. But there is thought behind it, and it's really interesting to see how that kind of grows the development of the championship. So you go from your rule creation, sitting behind paperwork, all that kind of stuff. Then the fun part comes of testing out car and track combinations. So I don't know about you, Chris, but when I look for esports competitions, I want something that's going to produce good racing, but is also enjoyable to drive in. And I think that's maybe something we're missing out on at the moment.
Yeah, I think, well, a lot of esports competitions are driven by tie-ins with real world series. So you're going to get tracks that produce horrendous racing, you know. So thankfully the SRO series hasn't taken on Hungaroring this year, but Blancpain goes there. So if the calendar's different next year, and I'm not privy to details of that, and we go to Hungaroring, it doesn't produce great racing in GT3 cars. And obviously the F1 esports series has that problem. You know, Monaco is Monaco, Budapest is Budapest. They are what they are. So yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah, definitely. So just touching on that, for example, what we picked is we had a multi-class championship. So we had pro teams who were invited to the series by SMS or Slightly Mad Studios, and they raced in a GT3 car. And then we had the secondary class, which was a touring car. So is it something you'll ever see on track together? And you can correct me, but I don't think it's ever been on.
Yeah, in the 24-hour series, they run TCR alongside.
Of course they
GT3.
do, don't they? Yes. Okay. So it's not a common combination, shall we say?
It's a scary combination on a number of tracks.
Definitely. So then you're designing this qualification phase, and it's an issue that is still a problem, and I don't think we're going to fix for a long time. Is it's a hot lap setup. Yeah. I hate using it, but it's really the best way you can go. So we've got 4 weeks of qualification, and then you had a shootout at the end. So that qualification setup is all its own entity within the championship. And sure, you might only see the main championship if you're watching it at home, but there is all this history behind it. And I think what's nice from a commentator's perspective, I guess, is it allows you to build up a bit of a history and a driver profile, which I'm sure is something as we move forward you'd like to see.
I think that's one of the, I've spoken about this before, and I think that's one of the big weaknesses of racing esports. And I don't think it's true in other esports competitions to the same extent, but I think, again, I've touched on this before, having a relationship with the drivers is important. You know, I would love to, I love watching like a Clio Cup race somewhere on TV. I'll watch it if it's on, it'll produce great racing, it'll be fun, but I'm not emotionally invested in that series in the same way that I am with Formula One or the Blancpain GT series or WEC or whatever, because there are names, there are personalities, there's history. You know, I know everything that's got to that point. And we've done I don't think we've necessarily done a bad job as an industry, but we haven't worked hard enough at selling the human side of it yet. And I think that's a big problem with esports and automation as well. Anyone that watched the Robo Race video I did a few weeks ago, and I've got another one coming up in a couple of weeks, will know that actually trying to tell the human stories in these sort of computerized worlds is a really, really important thing for the big brands to get across. And I think for people like myself that are trying to communicate in this world as well.
Definitely. I think so. For example, we had in the qualification series for SMSR, we had a driver called Villalobos, who I don't know personally, but was top of the timesheets every week.
Great name.
Yeah, it was great. And unfortunately, what happened is he got into the qualification race, and admittedly, this is probably a downfall on our part, but just because of the nature of esports currently, we didn't have much of a story to tell about him beyond the fact that he's this very quick driver. And like you say, when you're watching F1, you're not watching Hamilton just because he's extremely quick. You're watching him because of the personality around him. Love him or hate him, it's a drawing aspect.
Well, I'm going to embarrass you now, Josh. I think the reason that you're here on this show today is because the first time I met you in Monza for the SRO series, you came up, introduced yourself, we had a conversation. I knew more about you than I knew about any of the other drivers. You happened to get involved in a race where you had the widest Bentley in Italy. So you did get a lot of screen time, but we talked about you a lot because we knew who you were. Yeah. It's you know the names because a lot of these guys in that particular series are quite big esports names from the big teams. So who they are, but you don't really know a great deal about them.
Exactly, yeah.
And yeah, it's tough. So I think, you know, there is a big part of why, you know, you're on the show today is that relationship that developed from there. So I've handed you a really awkward.
No, it's a really good point though,
take.
because it's like you say, when we run a championship, always it's important to draw in the views. So we'll invite the big teams, whether that's, you know, the likes of Red Bull Esports or Williams or anyone, and they are, don't get me wrong, they're great people to have in a championship. The excitement and the quality of drivers that they bring, you know, even Veloce, meeting some of those drivers, incredible. But there's got to be another aspect to it, and I don't know if it's something we can create in the near future, but that environment of spending more time with the drivers.
Yeah, and I think as productions get better and budgets in certain series improve, other series are very well funded, so it's certainly not budget that's an issue there. But you know, there are all sorts of reasons why this content doesn't get created. But yeah, we spend a bit of time doing that.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think we've meandered around that point.
We have,
I'm going to super quickly look at the list of. Well, yeah, we were talking about what goes into producing a live event, weren't we?
Of course,
then we got
yes.
sidetracked by talking about telling the driver's stories.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, you have your rule and regulation creation. You then go into the championship format and development, all that testing, and then it's the actual running of the championship. So this is where the broadcast comes into aspect. So making sure that the quality of the broadcast is there, all the basic stuff, right through to where it's going to be streamed. So if it's on a main channel or if it's through the, you know, sponsors channel, anything like that, which is probably the point that most people will recognize. They'll recognize a broadcast. You know, it's pretty straightforward. And then you get to the exciting part, which is the finals. And something that we're trying at the Events House a lot is to push this sort of LAN environment, but not in a way that we've maybe seen before. I mean, you'll probably have seen that the market's kind of, or I should say the history of esports and sim racing in particular, as a LAN environment has improved.
Yeah, very much.
I think looking back to some of the really old stuff, it was just kind of sims thrown together. Whereas now we've got, you know, venues like Mercedes-Benz World, like you say, it's busy and it's creating a nice atmosphere. So when the live final comes around, then it's just bringing everything together that you've been working on over the past few weeks. And that's when we bring in the people that can talk well, like yourself. We bring in the pretty faces to sit on the cameras, all that kind of stuff. And that's really exciting to see this interaction between TV level broadcasts and sim racers kind of coming out of their environment.
You've made a really interesting point there right at the end,
Yeah.
which is, and this is something I don't think I've communicated, and I don't see too many people talking about, is the level of production that is going into some of these is just ridiculous. I was at the World's Fastest Gamer rFactor 2 round a few weeks ago. They invited me along to be a driver steward, and just looking at the broadcast production side of that. So I know some of the people that were involved in that through other jobs, and yeah, they're a TV broadcast that was involved in this. And this is, you know, 20 guys playing rFactor 2 and being broadcast by tens of thousands of pounds worth of production stuff with millions of pounds worth of equipment. Just the scale of this is extraordinary. I don't want to get too much into the fact that, you know, I have talked about extensively on the channel that a lot of money is coming into sim racing from manufacturers, from sponsors that want to get involved in this esports being. I think I've covered that quite a lot, so maybe we'll move on, because all I'll do is start getting concerned that it's a bubble and that we need to capitalize on it. And
yeah, I won't say too much on that apart from using F1 esports as an example. There was at least 200 people in the studio that are working, so if we can finance that, there's some longevity to it. But
yeah, well, actually no, I mean that's a good point, and I think that's a positive take on it as well, because you know, I am concerned that when someone like a BMW says, right, we're going to quit our involvement in WEC with the BMW M8 program, and we're going to concentrate on our Formula E program and esports, because it's such a nebulous idea. And it's like, yeah, sure, a BMW or a Porsche or whoever can come and say, right, we've got this checkbook, what do you want to do? There are negatives to that, but the way F1 esports seems to be growing, particularly this year, is really heartening to watch. It's great that Ferrari are involved now.
yes,
Our friends involved in it as well, which is always nice.
it's a very small world, isn't it?
Yeah, the more people I get to know in this particular industry, the more I realise there aren't many of us. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the last F1 esports event was just fantastic to watch.
Definitely. I know you could argue perhaps it's a bit of a unique scenario because it's got the F1 brand to it, but I think, and I can't go into too much details, but the people that we deal with in terms of clients and that approach us for the competitions we create, there's a lot of them from walks of life that I wouldn't even consider associated to motorsport, but they've got an interest in esports. So we're kind of, maybe this is a complete on topic, but we're at a situation now where sim racing, I should say, needs to decide, is it going to emulate motorsport or go its own way?
No, I think that's totally not on my list of questions, but we could do a whole episode on that.
Exactly.
And it's something that we in the race department production team for SRO Esports, I think we end up on that subject about once a week. There's a really, and it's a question we sort of posed before we came on air, actually, is how do we get sim racers involved in esports?
Yes.
More interested in esports. There's lots of ideas, like, it being more grassroots rather than just being the top 1%. But equally, motorsport fans haven't necessarily taken to it quite to the level that they could do yet. And then that does form the questions like, well, they're emulating a real thing. Are you going to get motorsport fans by copying what's out there, but with pretend race cars? And equally, sim racers, are you going to watch something that you can do in your own bedroom?
It's a fair point, but I think if we look at venues like this, like you say, come back to that grassroots aspect, so I use Williams as an example because we're a licensee at the Events House. So if you book a race day at Williams, I'm not going to do a sell or anything, but if you book a race day at Williams, as part of the experience, you get to go into their esports lounge, try out the simulators, whether it's a motion simulator or static ones.
Is that up at Grove?
Yes, it is. Yeah, exactly. So the people that you've got there, like you say, they're motorsport fans who maybe aren't necessarily esports, but at least now they have an introduction. And similarly here at Mercedes-Benz World, if you're here for a driving experience, you can come up here and try it simulators as well.
Listening to people talking about just their 10, 20-minute sessions on these sims today has been instructive, actually, as someone who is far too much of an insider now to really understand anything about how the general public might perceive this kind of thing. It's been great. I'd pay money just to stand and watch members of the public race on race sims. It's been really interesting, and I do think you're right, actually, Josh. I think this is a really important way of getting new people into the hobby and getting people involved in the competitive side as well.
Definitely.
So I think we covered that pretty thoroughly of what goes into the actual production side of things. Let's take it to the other side of the fence. You've been involved as a driver in the SRO Esports series this year. You've been sort of dabbling as a professional esports
at times
driver.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through that side of things a little bit? Sort of one, how you sort of started to get into that, and two, sort of what goes into the preparation for a series. And let's use the SRO Esports series as because it's a particularly complex one because the full game wasn't released when it came out. There's lots to talk about there, Josh.
There is
don't hold back.
Definitely. So, I mean, like I said, for me, AC has always been, I've had a fondness of that. And I just went out to E3 for the ACC launch. Which was an incredible experience. So when ACC launched its esports series, did I think it was too early? 100%. I don't want to use the term complete game, but I don't think we were at a state where it was ready. And I think...
Well, it was version 0.7 at the time. So
is that what it was? Yeah, exactly.
Even based on the numbers, I think the numbers agree with you.
That's it. And it'd be really interesting to hear from your side. As a driver, I was like, physics, netcodes, all the basics, they were there, but they weren't quite ready. And I don't know from a commentary aspect if that provides a bit of concern as well.
I think it did. I need to be a little bit careful. I don't think anyone that's involved would be upset if I said that. I think everyone on site at Monza was concerned because the game was still in its beta stage. It was version 0.7 was the public beta. They had a preview of version 0.8, I think, there. It wasn't quite version 0.8. I don't know what their internal numbering is. It doesn't really matter. But yeah, there were a lot of concerned faces about, how well some of it was going to work. And most of it did. Yeah. Which is good. But there were certain parts, I think that this was an unfinished game. They wanted to give it the least amount of stress as possible. And I think that did come across in the broadcast a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think, like you say, Kunos didn't hide that fact that it wasn't a full game when there is. And I've got so much love for Davide, Marco, and the whole team because they put in such a great effort. And going into Monza, for me, it was, okay, I have these concerns, but as a driver, it's about being focused. I really liked the idea that they brought this silver aspect where you could qualify, the bronze aspect, where you could qualify on site for a competition because in many ways, it opens up that lower level because the likes of Camille Franchak, who's dominated our Niels, I'm nowhere near as fast as them. So for me, online qualifying was never an option. But to come on site and get a taste of what an esports event was like was incredible. Obviously, the racing was great. I had some really enjoyable battles there as we commentate, or you commentated on, I should say.
You're one of the few people that didn't take a Lambo, which means you were one of the few people that didn't spin at some point.
Exactly. So I think as a driver, when you go into an event like that, there's so much that you don't recognize. I think at all the rounds, I've been positioned pretty close to the commentary desk because every so often I kept looking across
it. Quite well.
Yeah. And it's like you say, realizing how many people are just behind the scenes, making sure that the drivers are in their rigs at the right time, the race is starting, you've got Kunos on site, making sure the game's running smoothly. It's quite overwhelming, but it's such a great atmosphere to be inside. And I wish, or I hope that as we move forward in esports, everybody can, for lack of a better term, everyone can experience it.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the whole, one of my frustrations is not being able to broadcast quite how cool it is, to be involved and on site of those things. But yeah, taking a step back there, you're talking about the sort of number of production staff on site. Even SRO Esports is far from the biggest of these things, but you would have AK Informatica who do all of the, they sort out all the rigs, the computers, they do the behind the scenes broadcasting stuff, bringing all the pictures together, all the microphones, the cameras, all of that side of things. They've probably got 8 or 10 people on site. Kunos have got half a dozen people on site, depending on which racetrack it is and who can get to it. Then RD, we've got 3 or 4 people on site producing content. I say we, I'm a tagger on with RD, but for the purposes of that, RD is we. And so between that's 20 people, and plus 12 guys driving, plus all of their teams, plus all of the people spectating in one single garage unit at Nürburgring, for example, there's an atmosphere.
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly with your viewership and the people that are engaging with your content, I'd love to have them come to these events, maybe not to race, but just to see in terms of the equipment setup.
I think that's something we need to do better, is get better public access to this kind of stuff, because at the moment it's a bit difficult, because you've got to say fly to Paul Ricard and then buy a race ticket and then buy a paddock pass and then get into the place where there are some issues that sort of just really boring nitty gritty business type issues that need resolving there. Otherwise, I think you could make much more of a spectator sport out of this. And I think, again, that's something that F1 Esports is doing a better job of now.
I'd say that's
with the studio audience.
Definitely. I mean, I think you and I, again, are very fortunate in that, well, maybe not, I don't know, on your side, but particularly for me, going to Paul Ricard, I had Thrustmaster who were funding it all very fortunately. But even then, I was still conscious of how much it was spending. I don't know if it was the same for you.
Yeah. It's not the cheapest place in the world, the south of France.
That's it. And we're literally talking about watching a production of an esports competition, not even entering. Yeah. So, a lot of people like to joke and bash about iRacing's pricing model, but that's not an issue. It's the whole sim market at the moment is the issue. And particularly as we design competitions, that's something we're mindful of, is making it accessible at events like Autosport in January or Mercedes-Benz World.
Yeah, so I don't think we really covered the sort of event preparation. What do you do to?
Yeah, we've kind of danced around that. Sorry.
You really don't want to talk about driving pretend race cars, which is a shame because that's what this whole channel's about, Josh.
Yeah, so I think so just quickly glancing on the live event production. So we'll usually be there 2 or 3 days before, setting up the rigs in what we call a standardized set. So it's literally it's in a camera-friendly position, and then making sure that the basic driver packages, everything that if you were to come out of your house and sit in a rig, you'd expect to be in the rig. Then the next couple of days is spent sitting with the drivers. They come in and kind of tweak everything from the pedal position through to their force feedback settings. And that's really interesting to see as well. Just how different drivers approach things differently. I don't know if you've seen any of the F1 broadcasts.
Yes. Yeah.
So like Brendan Lee's a really good example. He'll spend the majority of his race just changing the MFD, whereas some other drivers won't touch it. So a lot of the event preparation is the drivers fine-tuning things as close as they can get to home. And then for me as a driver, when I'm in that environment, it's getting used to having cameras in your face, people watching you. It's
commentators distracting you.
Yeah, it can be quite daunting at times, to be honest. Yeah, that's kind of how it goes.
Something I've always, again, I'm going to embarrass you a little bit, because I get to watch people reacting to incidents, and your run through the SRO Esports series this year there's been 1 or 2 incidents.
Yeah,
I don't think anything's really been your fault, but you've been caught up.
I'm glad you say that.
I think you've been caught up in a couple of
yes, definitely
unfortunate circumstances. What's really impressed me, and it's all esports drivers in general, but your ability to just, something bad happens, and I'll look over and I'll just see you to literally physically take a deep breath, and then game faces back on and gone like that. I think a lot of the people watching will sympathise more with the get on the team speak, start swearing, kind of approach to incidents, or having a laugh about it if you're perhaps slightly less of a keyboard warrior, But it's always impressive just to watch how people react to that kind of thing. We had the incident in the Nürburgring. Was it in the final?
It was in the silver final, wasn't it?
The silver final with Kamil and.
Which incident are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of a different incident. Which one are you thinking of?
I was thinking of where I got taken out, but...
Oh, no, you're thinking...
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, no, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. So we've essentially just created a series of two overlapping stories.
I think it's...
But it was Aaron and... was it Aaron and Kamil came to... No, it wasn't Kamil. No, it's gone.
Okay, so I think...
I'm not going to edit this out. I'm going to leave that in, because if you've sat... how far are we into the recording? We're a good half an hour in, 40 minutes in or so.
If they've sat this long.
If you sat this long, you'll put up with
They're here
that.
for it all. Yeah. I think, just touching on that quickly though, if you remember at Monza, we had, I remember I got taken out in one corner when I was battling with Max Verdi in the final.
Yes.
And at pretty much the same time, Hani El Sabzi
Yes.
went over the curb and had all those issues. In terms of being able to take a step back and almost readjust, like you say, game face back on, that's come from the grassroots. That's come from stuff like community races like yours or stuff on Race Department. It's not something that you just have.
Well, and not all of the competitors do have it. I
Exactly,
think,
yeah.
Not to put Hani on the spot, but
He's had a tough run.
he's had a tough run.
Yeah.
Hani's been, to be really clear, Hani El Sabti's had a really tough. He's been quick enough in pretty much all of the rounds to qualify, but something has happened to him one way or another. Usually not his fault.
I'm buying him a calculator for Christmas.
Yeah,
though,
Nürburgring, he ran out of fuel on the last lap, which was painful to watch. After a stunning performance.
It was a good drive.
Yeah, it was such a shame. But he's maybe not as quick at bouncing back. And there are other drivers you see that, an incident happens and the headset will come off and it'll be thrown across the room. And it's just like, it's just interesting to see the different approaches, which again, something you don't always get through the broadcast.
It's something that needs to be built into the broadcast. We're just going to keep picking on Hani here, which I'm sure he won't mind. But like you say, after he failed to finish the race at Nürburgring, he went over to the wall, and I remember he pretty much was sat down against it with his head in his hands. If that was on the broadcast, for me as a producer, that would have been perfect.
That's more of a story than almost certainly what was happening on the screen at the time. Although probably what was happening on the screen at the time was the race ending.
Oh yeah, of course. Let's not take away from that.
But these things are super important, and you understand why they build that into, say, the F1 broadcast. I mean, it's easy to criticise the F1 broadcast when they cut to some of these stories. There was a great one. I don't know if you got a chance to watch the Italian Grand Prix, but
I didn't know
because you were, there was a point when Vettel was doing his sim racing rejoin, where he. Have you seen the incident?
I haven't. I'm a Seb fan, so I don't know if I want to hear it.
Okay, well, he spun without any pressure at Ascari.
All right, okay.
And then just drove at 90 degrees onto the track in
classic online lobby fashion.
Yeah, online lobby, yeah. It was messy. But just after he spun and was just starting to rejoin, the camera cuts away to the crowd reaction. So you actually missed the point where Seb is rejoining. It turns out he hit Lance Stroll as he rejoined.
Do you think that was preventative from what happened at Spa, or do you think we're maybe...
Yeah, I hadn't considered that. That's really interesting. I just assumed it was the usual... there's a definite directorial decision that when an incident happens, they like to show the crowd reaction. Again, telling the human story.
Yeah.
I found that they tend to be quite quick to cut to the reaction and quite often miss the... that guy's overtaken the other guy. So, well, actually, the move isn't complete yet. You should really just hold fire for 2 seconds. But actually, I think that's a really interesting point, given that Vettel was 90 degrees across the track.
But even still, it's really interesting you're touching on about the length of the shot, what shot's being taken. As we design a competition, the people that we work with, whether it's commentators or the design team, this is all feedback that helps us create better broadcasts. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about this.
Oh, right. Well, I've got a list of complaints about every broadcast I've ever seen, but we won't go into them on air. But I think that pretty much brings us to everything I've wanted to cover here, Josh. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
No, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour and privilege, genuinely. Like I say, going from watching this at home to being this side of the camera, even seeing now the amount of equipment you've brought, it's incredible, really incredible.
It's been really nice to go and actually be able to shoot this on location. I've taken gear with me to go and do some of these when we've been at the SRO events, and for one reason or another, all of them have fallen through. So it's nice to actually get one in the can rather than just take a load of equipment with me around the world for no reason. And if you're one of the people that bailed on those interviews and you're watching, then you know who you are. Anyway, Josh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me, mate.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you can see more content like this in future. So all I'd like to say is goodbye. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the rest of the day.